Let's see. Oh, I can see people in the chat.
That's nice.
Okay, we're here. We're on screen. So welcome everybody to the National Creative Writing Industry Conference. I can see people in the chat. Oh, I'm actually going to mute myself first.
That's nice.
Hey, we're here. We're on screen. Okay, muted, so you're not going to hear me play back. Sorry, everybody, about that. So yeah, this is the National Industry Conference, which is in partnership with Common Press and Manchester Writing School. And I have our keynote speaker for this year with us. Really excited to have her with us. It's Irenosen Okojie. And I'm going to read a bit about Irenosen to introduce you to her before she talks you through her journey to publication as a writer. So Irenosen's debut novel, Butterfly Fish, won a Betty Trask Award and was shortlisted for an Edinburgh International First Book Award. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, The Observer, The Guardian, the BBC and the Huffington Post, amongst other publications. Her short story collection, Speak Gigantula, published by Jacaranda Books, was shortlisted for the Edge Hill Short Story Prize, the Jalap Prize, the Saboteur Awards, and nominated for a Shirley Jackson Award. Her new collection of short stories, Nudie Branch, published by Little Brown's Dialogue Books, was longlisted for the Jalap Prize. She is the winner of the 2020 AKO Kane Prize for Fiction for her story Grace Jones. So how it's going to work is I'm just going to fade into the background now, and then I'm going to come back at about 7:45 to run the Q&A with Irenosen. You guys have already found the chat box, so if you have a question for Irenosen at any time, just type it in there and we'll come to them at the end of the talk. So I'm going to hand over to you, Irenosen. Off you go.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Zoe, for that introduction. And thank you to Common Press and Manchester Writing School for this platform. I'm really privileged to be here and be the keynote speaker this year. I'm going to kick things off just by reading my keynote speech, and then I'll go into my talk and just talk you guys through my journey and how I found sort of navigating the writing space and getting to this stage in my career. So to kick things off, I'm going to read my speech, which is Transmissions from the Disruptive Space. The process of writing is elevating oneself to a higher consciousness. It is a political act. It is an eye in the crowd, a marauding wind from a ventriloquist pocket, a form of alchemy encouraging us to wrestle with the existential infringing on the everyday. It is a series of intimate processions unlike any other. I write from the disruptive space. There, I find the outlines of stories caving into each other. There, I lift up the crease papers waiting for the ineligible scrawl of my handwriting to make them blueprints. There, I know that writing is a conduit to alternate lives being. Stories live, breathe. They convert our imaginations into a multi-universe. Once upon a time, June Jordan meets me in the disruptive space. She hands me a prism which becomes constellations, a poem, a series of openings, a plot in a miniature painting of a drowning, a kaleidoscopic fall into the cosmos. She tells me there are no shortcuts writing to one's potential. You must do the work. Gather the parts of narratives in the dark, blindly, if necessary, to make them sing in the mornings. You must ask yourself whose stories you need to tell, then decide when you want to tell them. If there is no table to write on, build it. If there is no path trodden, carve it yourself. Here are the echoes I created with a feverish hand. You will make your own. June passes me a leaking pen to fell the inevitable doubts. Once upon a time, Sun Ra, CLR James, and Untusaki Shang exchanged passages on that disruptive, warm plane, imbued with the power of writing foremothers, knowing that they themselves will become literary ancestors. If art shows us ways of being, then I want to absorb the incandescent spirit of Octavia Butler's morning manifestations. inherit the daydreams of James Baldwin wandering the streets of Paris, then conjure some of my own, and hold Ursula K. Le Guin's carrier bags when I want my visions to defy definitions. The first stories I heard were fables around fires in Benin. I remember the laughter, elements of surprise, sharing food, the gathering of our bodies towards the story's center, the feeling of satisfaction. And afterwards, we were left with kernels for other possibilities, somehow changed by the wonder and power of storytelling. And the next time I heard versions of those stories again, they were told slightly differently, reclaimed by other cavernous mouths. This is the joy of stories whose meanings multiply, finding different entry points into our souls. How does one begin to write? Transforming the everyday into symphonies on the page is an art form. Showing the hidden lives of the disenfranchised is a quiet uprising. For some of us, writing is a need, not an indulgence. It is an act of bravery to make yourself vulnerable to an audience. You tackle your fears head on, forging onwards until you have an offering you can hold firmly. To want to capture something of this world and the next, we must write. We must write to explore our better selves, our base selves, our hidden selves. We must leave our stories like innumerable etchings breathing on the walls of the Kalahari's dragon breath cave. We must write for the street disciples speaking Sanskrit who travels to Kinkajou in winter to discover multiple truths, yet only takes one book. We must write for the boy being bullied who sees the same copy of The Fire Next Time in underground stations around the city and hears the words ringing in his ears through the garbled frequency of naysayers. We must write for the battered woman who views the company of books as a safe haven, and for the young man in prison who one day, in his greatest act of transformation, reaches for a copy of your novel. We give the girl who thinks she may be a tarantula in the evenings a copy of Kafka's Metamorphosis. Our stories have to be told, from the oral tradition of griots to the men on speakers' corners having epiphanies, to the youth using language as protest. Books change lives. Books are pilgrimage routes. They are energy forces that fuel our imaginations. We must write for our sanities. Books are comets which reappear in every possible version of reality. They sit in the body like jewels in the blood. Literature is for everyone, no matter your background. Your ideas matter, every single one. Find ways for them to be beating hearts, to flourish, to speak to you in the crack of dawn. Allow your stories the room to shift before eluding you, then appearing again, forming bit by bit. They can be optical illusions you reach for through the mundane of the everyday, the tiny embers gathering dimension in between breaths, the irrepressible flame in the dark which bends at your instruction. There are histories to be written, futures to leap into, the present to process in whatever fashion suits you. Your writing rhythms are waiting to infiltrate your bodies. They just need your pen, your fingerprints, steps of faith that double as anchors. A man trapped in the ice hotel in Jukkasjärvi, northern Sweden, loses his head at the bar. He does not know how this happened. A mute woman rescues an unharmed baby after an earthquake in California. A man in a hot air balloon hovering over the San Fernando Valley is without memory. These are characters awaiting their cataclysms on the page. What lies in the absences? They need their iterations of samsara. You can build worlds with a sense of urgency or create slowly, practicing a measured consistency. There is no right or wrong way to tell a story. Scribble the ending down, then work your way to the middle. Write beginnings until you find the correct one. Do things in the wrong order to see how it feels. Follow your instincts, challenge yourselves, embrace the anarchic spirits of literary ancestors urging you to look beyond perceived limitations. Start with the first sentence. Let it become an obsession. This is a clarion call. This is a moored siren sitting in the silence. We must write our multitudes into existence. So thank you for listening, guys. And yeah, thanks again for joining me. I want to talk you through just, my journey to this sort of stage in my career. So I was born in Benin in Nigeria. I moved to Lagos at a young age. And then aged 8, we moved to England. I went to boarding school in Norfolk. And I found that whole process really interesting in terms of the way Blackness was seen. When I lived in Nigeria, I hadn't been aware of the way Blackness was coded because of the multiplicity of it living in Africa. It was everywhere. So moving to Norfolk, like the cultural currencies, the differences between Africa and being in the UK were quite striking to me. So it was a real adjustment for me. I missed Africa a lot. I missed Nigeria. I missed spicy food. I missed the sun. I missed my friends. But it was a whole new world for me because my older brother was attending boarding school as well. And wherever he was, I wanted to be. So kind of adjusting and finding my bearings was really tough at first. But in the process of that, I discovered books. And the first book I picked up was Roald Dahl's Fantastic Mr. Fox, which just absolutely captured my imagination. I loved that it was sort of YA, but also adult fiction as well. It seemed to, straddle these two different genres brilliantly. And I love that it had this fantastical element, with this fox who was having all these adventures, but also wreaking havoc and revenge on his neighbors. So that really sort of spoke to me. And I was hooked from that point. I think I went on to get Matilda, and I also loved that book too. So in that process, I kind of, feeling alien was really tough, but somehow books were great company for me. And it was like being given a key, actually. It was like being given a key to unlock a kind of secret transformative power. And I felt like I had access to so much just reading these books. So I absolutely loved it and became a voracious reader, just reading as much as possible. So through that process, I really developed a kind of addiction to books. And then when I moved back to London again, I was sort of moving back and forth between Holt, Norfolk and London, going to London in the holidays and being in Norfolk during term times. I was always looking for library spaces. I absolutely love libraries. Libraries mean so much to me, and they were like a safe haven for me. I was that kid who would take out like 10 books on the library card, like the maximum that you could take out. And the librarians, they got to know me because they would start recommending things that they thought that I might like. So I found the space of libraries were really, really key in those sort of formative years, because I could access so much. And it was wonderful to be able to go there and lose myself in books. So it's a bit heartbreaking what's happening with our libraries at the moment. I hope that there's a future for them, because I think that I wouldn't be the writer that I am without them, and without sort of piling into them, whatever the weather, any point after school, whenever I could, I was just in there reading as many books as possible. So I guess the point of that is that I cultivated or developed a real appetite for learning. I wanted to learn as much as possible. about the writing process. I was just, at that stage, I wasn't necessarily thinking about starting to write, but I was just really interested in stories. And I remember, oral stories from back home, and then actually getting to physically hold stories and lose myself in them felt like just another stage in the process. So I really wanted to cultivate that appetite for discovering as much as possible, in terms of books. So narrative permutations. Then I started writing. I think my first scribbles, I kept a diary. I kept a diary in boarding school because I found the whole experience really quite strange and unusual. Like, you had to learn to be independent really young. And I was sort of without family, except, my family, my uncle in Hackney, I was without family. So I really sort of developed this practice of documenting my experiences, because I felt like it would help me going through that process of, perhaps feeling slightly alien, in the UK. So diary writing was the kind of first thing I really did. And through that process, it felt like I became a kind of secret observer, just watching everything, like curious to absorb as much as possible about my surroundings and kind of interpret them in ways that were funny, and I think really sort of speaks to our curiosity about each other and the human experience. So I was writing about the girls at boarding school, the kind of odd little cliques, the sort of hierarchy as well in that space. So I was like, but it wasn't something that I was telling people about. I would just do it kind of late at night with my torch under my duvet. So writing really, I think that led to it becoming a space of play for me. I saw it as somewhere that I could really just express myself as much as possible. And I really enjoyed being able to do that. So once that happened, it was something that became a kind of ongoing practice. So through that, I wanted to feed my imagination as much as possible. So I was writing a lot, I was reading as much as possible. I was adjusting to being in England as well. I kind of found my footing, as you do, and sort of adjusted to the things that I found difficult initially. And I made friends, and I think that helped me a great deal. But I wanted to keep writing. So I was trying to practice as many different forms as possible, not necessarily deliberately. I think it just happened that way. I was doing the diary writing. I was writing sort of miniature poems as well. I really love doing that. In fact, I still do that now. And I was like writing kind of mini plays as well. So moving between forms, it just sort of gave you this flexibility and freedom, which I thoroughly enjoyed. So I kept on sort of writing like for many, many years. I was always like writing in the background. In my 20s, I was writing as well. So it was just a thread, I think, in the background in my life, whatever I was doing, whatever like job I was doing, and I went through so many, I was writing in the background. So at the point at which I started to kind of think about taking it seriously, it was like, what stories do I want to tell? And for me, having read really widely, it was kind of heartbreaking to not see myself reflected enough in fiction. And that was something that really frustrated me. I wanted to read about, people of color and Black women. And, I had to, in a sense, read American books in order to get that, because, unfortunately, there weren't that many books published by Black British writers. So the ones that were there, I consumed, and then, I had to look to the US. So I was thinking, what stories do I want to tell? And I knew that I wanted to tell stories about people of color, about Black people, about Black women. I was really passionate about wanting to make our lived experiences visible, but I wanted to do it in ways that kind of push the boundaries of form and ideas, and really kind of expand expectations around what Black writers should write, and what stories should be told about us, and also like putting us in different contexts. I was really, really passionate about that. I still am passionate about that. So I kind of was very clear about the direction I wanted to go in. And then that led me to kind of permission to write. I think in the early stages, because I read so much from a young age, I didn't struggle with that. And I think that's something that I would encourage everybody to think about, is claiming that permission to write for yourself, as soon as you can, because often when I talk to people, they have stories, but they don't feel like they're interesting enough or that they have anything to say. But everybody has something to say, and everybody has a story, and if there are things that you're really interested in writing about, absolutely explore that, absolutely feel like you should be able to carve a space for yourself. I think that that's really, really important. So I gave myself permission to do that. And I think that just came from seeing that it was possible, seeing what literature could do and how writing could sort of transform lives, and how it had greatly impacted me in many ways. It gave me a kind of a quiet confidence. So that was where I got my permission to write. So the next point is cultivating an obsession. Absolutely, that is something I think that if you want to write, it has to be like food to you. It has to be like air. You have to really want to do it. So this idea of practicing it regularly, going to events, thinking about your characters, writing as much as you can in a way that you find enjoyable. It doesn't have to be a chore. It doesn't have to be something that's painful. Writing is a joy. So you want to practice it in ways that feel joyful. And so when you're cultivating that, that practice, what are the ways that you can break it down that feels like it's fun and that it isn't a struggle? So that's something that I really encourage people, to think about when they're starting their journey or wherever they are. How do you keep moving forward with it? One of the other things that helped me was literary ancestors. And I say this, basically just writers who really inspire you to keep going, whose work you really, really love. One of those people for me is poet June Jordan. I mentioned her in my keynote speech. So June was a Black woman, radical artist, writing poetry, like ingenious, inventive poetry about being a Black woman, Blackness, about class, about politics. And she was kind of like a real grassroots artist, but very much unsung. And I absolutely credit her as the reason why I was able to kind of, produce my first novel, because I would read a poem of hers every single day, early in the morning, to kind of open up my brain and to get me going. And I find her work so powerful and so brilliant. So she is somebody that's had a massive, massive impact on me. Similarly, Toni Morrison, I would say, again, I picked up Toni Morrison's jazz as a teenager from the library, of course. And this is a book that like mimicked a musical genre. And that kind of blew me away, that she was able to, capture this couple and this affair, but also kind of capture the experiences in the past and the context of each of the characters in a way that was like really complex and striking, but also doing like wondrous things with language. I don't think that she's credited enough for that. So that kind of blew me away and really struck me that, wow, this is a Black woman writer writing about the Black American experience in a way that I hadn't seen before, and like really made an impression on me. So, I loved her writing, and I was really inspired by her work. And similarly, Amos Tutuola as well, Nigerian writer who wrote The Palm Wine Drinkard. This is a novel about a man who goes in search of his palm wine tapster, and he goes into the spirit realm and meets a whole host of like just wacky, quirky characters. But again, like a singular book and, standalone writer when I think about African writers at the time. And he was doing something just really, really unique and really different. And that struck me. So these were the writers that I kind of looked to for inspiration. So I would encourage you to do the same. Like, who are the writers that really have had an impact on you? you know, pick their books up every now and again so that you can get that fire and that inspiration to keep going, because that's what it does. Every time you feel like, you know, you can't do it, or you feel like, well, how do I start this process? How do I keep going? You know, pick up a copy of your favorite writer's book. That's what I do with Toni Morrison or June Jordan or Amos. You know, these are books that I come to again and again, and every time I find something new in it. And that's the power of literature. You can always rediscover elements in it. One of the great tips that I received from my mentor some years back was to read first novels. And I think this is a really interesting tip, actually, because if you're somebody who's practicing, you know, you're writing regularly, you're really like sort of dedicated to the craft, you know, actually you're not that far off. So when you read a first novel, it's a bit like a first album. Very often they can be brilliant, but they're not necessarily always perfect. So it can be very encouraging for you, actually, if you read a first novel. And you read first novels, you know, you see how the writers constructed the work, but also you see like what are the mistakes they made and how can you learn from that. So I think first novels are kind of great to kind of encourage you to keep going, because actually you can see that you're not that far off. I remember, I won't name names, but I remember when I was like, you know, really like working hard at the craft and just wanting my work to be out there. And, you know, I would pick up a first novel and read it and think, oh, this is really good, but actually my writing's not that far off from this. So maybe, you know, there's hope for me after all. So I think that they can be really helpful as well. And while I was working on Butterfly Fish, I was kind of obsessed with reading first novels, but also like albums as well. And music is a really like big influence. So if you can draw from that to help you, absolutely use it. I was obsessed with Zap Mama, who's an African sort of French artist, and she does really like amazing things with sound, but her books, her tracks are also very kind of experimental, and that really spoke to me. And similarly, an album that I was obsessed with at the time, and when I was working on Butterfly Fish, was Pete Rock's and CL Smooth's The Main Ingredient. And it might seem like a random choice, but actually in terms of like the sort of virtuosity and the dexterity of the writing and the kind of jazzy experimental feel to it, I really connected with that. So those were like things that really spoke to me and had a kind of massive effect on me at the time. So like, have fun with the writing, you know, it doesn't have to completely always be serious every time. You can find ways to inject playful things into the process. And one of the ways I would do that is like playlists for characters, you know, really get to know your characters. Like what sort of albums would they listen to, you know, what sort of tracks would they be into, you know, doing like musical equivalents of your books. That's something that I like to have, you know, quite a lot of fun with when I was working on my novel. Is like, just like, oh, if I was to reinterpret this as a kind of album or music playlist, what would that look like? And it just adds another kind of dimension to the whole process of writing and creating. It's like this interesting ecosystem where lots of things go in. So find ways to be playful with it, is what I'm saying, basically. So writing is like, you have to like keep going, and it's joyous, but it's also hard. So, you know, I want to talk about failure, and the reason I say fail better is that failure doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. I think, even though it can feel really hard at the time, I think embracing imperfection is like the start, and something that will absolutely just liberate you. Once you accept that, you know, the work in the first few iterations isn't going to be perfect, that it's going to be flawed, you absolutely just free yourself. You liberate yourself from certain expectations. And it means that you get to kind of enjoy it a bit more, I think, when you do that. Of course, anything anybody attempts, you're never going to be brilliant at it straight away. You know, you have to work at it. You have to make mistakes. You have to learn from those mistakes. You have to pick yourself up again, you know. So embracing that it's not going to be perfect, that's going to help you so much. You know, I remember when I was working on my novel and wanting it to wanting it to be like perfect initially, wanting it to be brilliant, and the kind of disappointment I felt, you know, the producing the writing and comparing it to what I had imagined in my head. And that used to frustrate me so much, you know, but I just kept going, and, you know, I did draft after draft after draft, and each one got better, each one got stronger. And I could see the growth actually, you know, in between reading the different drafts. I could see that my writing improved, you know. So I think just allow space for that. And, you know, it's every single writer who you admire, every single book that you see published, they have gone through so many iterations, so many different drafts. So they also have to go through that process. Your heroes also go through that process. You know, they're also not perfect. So I think once we can accept that, it's going to help you so much. So the next thing I want to touch on is to course or not to course. Very often, kind of when I'm talking to like people around the scene, sometimes people ask me, well, Irenosen, do you think I should do, you know, do you think I should do a writing course? So I'm just gonna, yeah, it's thirsty work. Do you think I should do a writing course, or do you think I shouldn't do a writing course? What I would say to that is do what's gonna help you. Do what's gonna encourage you to produce that book. Some people need a course, you know, they need that structure in order to really focus and hone in on the work. And it just helps them to get going. It helps them to be consistent. And some people don't, you know, so whatever, figure out what sort of writer you are and figure out what you need and create the structure and support system that you need that will enable you to write. For me personally, I didn't want to do a course at the time because I kind of wanted to find my own voice. And I was somebody, like I said, who read so voraciously. So I knew that it was something was there, and I knew that I was seeking, like, you know, something slightly subversive and playful. So it was just a case of just keep working on the craft. So for me, it felt like the right decision to not do a course, but I would absolutely recommend it for, you know, somebody that feels like, you know, it's difficult to kind of get going, and you need that structure to encourage you. So figure out what's going to help you and absolutely go for it. I'm just speaking in that vein. I think workshops are really good in between space, in terms of, you know, whichever one you go for. I love the workshop space because it's a really safe space, and very often people do finally kind of get that permission to write. You know, you see it like often when I've run workshops and people start opening up and they start having conversations and they start sharing their stories and they start talking about the things that they want to explore, something really magical happens. You know, it's a really lovely space. So, you know, if you don't necessarily want to do a course, you can do workshops. In between that, you could do, you know, a series, or you could do one-offs now and again. I really like the workshop space. I think people seem to really kind of discover like what they want to do, and there's a real magic to it. So for me, it's a really fun space, and it's a safe space as well. The other thing is agents. So yeah, this is something that I get asked about a lot, and you will get no's. Unless you're extremely lucky, you will get no's in the beginning. Even some of the most brilliant writers get rejected by agents. I got rejected quite a bit in the beginning, you know, so yeah, it's just part of the process. And I think that once you accept that, you know, it means that you get stronger in terms of, you know, how you move forward. You understand that this is something that happens and you just keep going. So do your research, you know, seek out who you think might be a really good fit for you. There are new agents and agencies all the time. Eventually I got to a stage when I was writing, I got to a stage where 3 agents were interested in me. Having gone through the first few stages of people saying no a lot, I finally got to a place where 3 agents were interested, and that was really an exciting place to be. And in the end, I went with my agent, Elise Dillsworth, who's absolutely like brilliant, like one of the best agents around. And I really wanted to sign with her because she was a commissioning editor at Virago, so she had excellent pedigree. She had a good eye for detail. She was a strong editor, having formerly been a commissioning editor. So she was kind of perfect for me, having had that background, and it was my first novel. And she was just about to start her agency, so she was kind of new in the agent world, and looking for new voices. So I was kind of, it was perfect really, and we met up, and things happened from there. So I would say really do your research in terms of agents and agencies. Look for some of the newer agents as well, because I think that they're kind of really keen to build their lists. Look for the kind of more boutique agencies, because there's much more of a focus on you. I think you get looked after, and what you want is an agent that's really passionate about your work first and foremost, that really gets it and understands what you're trying to do and will be your champion. It's really important, I think, that your agent loves your work. If your agent doesn't like your work, or should I say love your work, then you might need to rethink that. You might need to rethink getting a different agent. But it's really crucial, I think, to have somebody who can be a real advocate for you. So, find out, who the new agents are. Sometimes the more established agents can be really difficult to sort of connect with, because their lists are full, and they have the big name authors, and they may not have space on their lists. So absolutely, look out for those agencies that are newer, and also the ones that are actively looking for diverse voices as well, are inclusive. I think that's really important in the current climate. And there are some out there, there are good agents that are looking for exciting voices. So it's just about sort of researching who they are. And also, if you get offered representation by an agent, you don't necessarily have to just sign with the first person that offers. Sometimes we want to do that because we're so happy that somebody wants to represent us. But if there are a couple of people interested, meet all of them, and get a sense of who might be right for you. Don't just sign with the first one. Really do your research. And that brings me to, I guess, rejection as fuel. I was just talking about being rejected, and how that is a massive part of the process, and that's okay. And the way I approached it was you kind of have to have a certain amount of confidence as well, I think, and you have to build that up, even if you feel at times that you don't necessarily feel that way. I think it's important to kind of help you keep going forward. So if people say no, that's fine. You take on, the critique that is useful, and the stuff that isn't useful, you just forget about it and ignore it. You don't sort of absorb it, because, that can get you down, so you have to develop a way, I think, of being able to take on the good and ignore the bad, and use that to kind of propel you forward, keep going. Just because somebody said no doesn't mean that your writing's not good. Just because somebody said no doesn't mean that you shouldn't be writing. A lot of the best writers got rejected really badly. Some of the greatest books were rejected multiple times. We all know the stories. So you will find that right advocate and agent for you. You just have to keep going. You have to keep working on your craft, keep your eyes open, sign up to newsletters, development agency newsletters, so you can know who's about in the industry, and often new names will come up. So, keep your eyes peeled for them, and, approach people that you think might be a good fit for you, but don't let it get you down if people say no, because it's just part of the process. So I want to touch on industry barriers for Black writers. Obviously, I am one, and I had difficulty being published in the early stages, just because when my agent was sending the work out, it was Black British woman, experimental writer, so it was tricky, because a lot of the feedback we got was positive, but very often people would say, oh, we don't know how she fits on our list, like, oh, we don't know how to market her. I remember, like, you know, publishers saying, oh, we're not sure how to market Butterfly Fish, which was partly a historical novel. And I was really just flummoxed by that, because I thought, well, surely you'd market it the way you'd market any other historical novel. There was just like a real lack of imagination. This was 7 years ago. So this is before the whole push for inclusivity and diversity. And it was a slightly different landscape then. You know, so there was kind of a real lack of imagination, I think, in terms of, you know, how they would support Black writers, or how they would push Black writers, or, you know, persons of color writers. It just, you know, it was really frustrating. So that was quite hard to deal with. But, you know, the other option is there are, you know, independent publishers doing really exciting things as well. So that is an option for you if you're trying to get published. Independent publishers are, you know, they're taking risks. They're publishing like really exciting, dynamic voices. And those books are getting out there. You know, they're winning awards. They're being shortlisted for stuff. You know, they're out in the bookshop. So it's not really that different anymore, actually, if you think about it. So that's also an option. And that's what happened in my situation. I was picked up by Jacaranda Books. It was a 2-book deal for you know, Butterfly Fish and Speak Gargantula, and then off the back of that, those books did quite well critically, and then the fantastic Charmaine Lovegrove, the brilliant Charmaine Lovegrove, who's my publisher now, picked up my next 2 books. So you know, there is a way. I think you just have to do the work. If there are any sort of you know, Black writers watching, or persons of color writers, you know, just keep doing the work. And now I think it's an even like better climate, because there is that desire to support these voices. I hope it's not just a trend. Hopefully, you know, we'll see down the line, hopefully, like, this is something that will become a part of the, you know, the industry, and it just be a part of the agenda, really, to get those voices out there, because it's really important, and it just enriches like our publishing scene. We need different exciting voices. We need people from different backgrounds writing different stories, because it's all, you know, it's all reflecting the human experience, and it's great to have those stories, and those stories should be valued. So yeah, absolutely, it's brilliant to see it happening, and long may it continue. So the other thing I want to touch on next is you as the first audience. This might sound like a selfish thing, but when I first started writing, I was writing for myself. I wasn't writing for anybody else. And I remember a Toni Morrison quote. I think the quote is, if there's a book you haven't seen out there that you want to read, write it. I think it's something along those lines. So I really took that quote to heart. And that was something that really fueled me when I was working on my first novel, Butterfly Fish, was, you know, like, I hadn't seen a book like that was celebrating, like, you know, the Benin Kingdom, where my like ancestry is from, certainly not in fiction. And I really wanted that book to be out there, because I was so passionate and obsessed with that story for years. You know, I was so determined to get it out there. So I was, in a sense, writing for myself. And I think that's good, because you don't worry about what an audience thinks. You don't worry about the industry stuff when you're at that stage. You're just doing the work. You're just doing the writing. And if you're excited about the work, when it does get published, it will definitely find an audience. So you don't have to worry about, you know, stuff like that while you're writing. Just enjoy the process, enjoy the world that you're creating and what you're trying to say as an author, and, you know, your intentions as the writer, and everything else will kind of fall into place. Yeah, the long game. So this is something I think is really key, seeing writing as a long game. When this epiphany happened to me years ago, it really helped me. Earlier, I mentioned being at a stage where I was just really frustrated because I wanted the quality of my writing to be very strong, and it wasn't there at that point. And this was something that, you know, I was so annoyed with myself about, but all I needed to do was just pause and realize that writing takes time. Everything takes time, you know. So once you see writing as a long game, it makes it so much more enjoyable. So I want to like encourage people who are feeling, you know, frustrated that, you know, maybe X person that they know has a book deal, or so-and-so that they were in a, you know, book club with got a book deal. Don't worry about any of that. That's great. And you should be happy for them. But also your time is coming as well. So just be aware of that. And don't get dejected. So I want to touch on optimal writing time as part of this. Figure out when the best time to write is for you, and then develop that as a practice. Write during that time. You know, some people write after work, you know, some people write on the weekends. I personally get too tired after work to write. So my optimal writing time is early in the morning, 6:30 a.m., 7 a.m. in the morning, writing for 2 to 3 hours in short bursts. Because I think that that kind of like state of being half asleep and half awake really lends itself to my sort of style of writing. So I figured out what works for me, and I tend to write 3 to 4 days a week when I'm working on a project, and then I have the rest of the week off because I like having that space for things to sort of you know, simmer and develop. I think it's quite nice to do that, but figure out what works for you and then stick to that routine like religiously. And if you do that bit by bit by bit by bit by bit, before you know it, you have a novel. You know, before you know it, you have a collection. But you just have to figure out a structure that works for you. So the next thing is finding your tribe. Yeah, this is really important, I think, because writing can be very isolating. Certainly I found it quite lonely, you know, early on, like just the quietness of it, which you need. We need that. We need the quietness. We need that time. But it's also good to have people that can be encouraging, who are also in the same boat as you. So, you know, find other writers that are also maybe at a similar stage, and that can be quite helpful. The next thing is enablers, facilitators, champions, mentors. Like this is really, really important. You can't just write and hide away. I always say that, like, you have to kind of get out there and, you know, meet people and talk to people about your work, and really just put yourself out there, because it helps. Like, you need other people to sometimes help get you to the next stage. So enablers are really, really important. Mentors are really important. You know, people who like your work, who can be your champions, because, you know, they might say, oh, have you talked to such and such agent? Have you spoken to this editor? I think that editor might really like your work. You know, so it's really important to connect if you can, so that you know, you can get access to these opportunities. And as part of that, I want to touch on development agencies, because they are really key for that. Many years ago, I did a program called Flight with Spread the Word. Spread the Word are fantastic. And Flight was basically a mentoring scheme for young writers, poets, playwrights. And, you know, we were all sort of partnered with mentors within the different disciplines for a year. And as a part of that, I think we got to do an Arvon, we got to do an event at the South Bank Centre, we got to be part of an anthology. But the main thing was getting regular mentorship. And within that bubble that Spread the Word created, you know, I got an absolutely fantastic mentor called Donna Daly Clark, who would feed back on my work quite regularly. We would meet up, you know, every 2 months or so, and she would encourage me to keep writing, and I would do more. In fact, the idea for Butterfly Fish to become a novel came through that process of having a mentor, and that was through Spread the Word. So I think development agencies are really, really important. If you can, like, connect to them. There's New Writing North, New Writing South as well. TLC are also absolutely fantastic, run by Aki Schultz, who's brilliant. I think they do like a free read scheme as well. So there are opportunities for people to kind of tap into. So absolutely try to access them, because one of the things that I'm really passionate about is debunking access in the industry, because for a lot of emerging writers, it's really, really difficult. Like, how do you get an agent? How do you get to connect with an editor? Well, development agencies are the middlemen. They are brilliant in that way, because they can connect you to those people. So absolutely, like, you know, be on their radar, get in touch with them, you know, like arrange a meeting to talk about your work, or what stage you're at, or, you know, what sort of support do you need? And they, you know, very often are quite happy to to spend that time with you and to kind of, connect you to programs that they might be running that will be very useful for you. So yeah, I think like they are really fantastic. And I credit Flight with sort of sending me on my way, really. That program gave me the confidence to keep writing. And the fact that my mentor was a Black woman made me feel seen. It made a huge difference to me while I was writing. So yeah, development agencies are amazing. I want to touch on craft and reward systems. So it's a long game. You have to keep working at your craft. It's also hard. We know that, especially for novelists, short story writers, putting together a collection, one story after another for a novel, like that can go on for years. So you want to be able to create a reward system for yourself. Like, maybe if you write a quarter of the novel, you go away, or, you do a writing residency, you treat yourself to something, because it is a long haul thing. So you want to incorporate exciting things as part of that to kind of help you keep going. Otherwise, nobody else is going to do it. It's really important, I think, to have that in place, because it means that you stay excited and you feel like you're making progress, and you feel like it's not just this big thing that is unending and there's no reward as part of it. So I think creating some sort of reward system for yourself is very, very helpful. Fake it till you make it. Yeah, this is, I think this is about the psychology of it. Like, if, as far as I'm concerned, if you are writing, you're working on your novel, you're working on your collection, even if it's not out yet, you are a writer. Don't let anyone make you feel like you're not. And when I say fake it till you make it, I mean, embrace that. A lot of people sometimes are very, very shy about claiming that space because they don't have a book out. Well, so what? You will in time if you keep working at it. And also, get stuff published, like in journals, to build your confidence. Write for some of the broadsheets, write for other journals, just get your voices out there. And I think bit by bit, that will help you feel confident and help you to kind of walk in those shoes and embrace, like, the feeling of being a writer or being an author, and, do events as well, so that you kind of develop that discipline of feeling like you belong in that space. And don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong in that space, because people can be very mean-spirited sometimes, but just ignore that. If it's your passion and something that you love doing, keep going, keep doing things to feed it, keep developing it. Okay, so ways to stay curious. I think we're like going over time, but just stay with me. I think this is really, really important, because we're all human beings. We all want to be excited about our art and life. And, doing that means that it's like fuel, really. It keeps you going. So I'm sure all of you know this already, but it's probably worth reminding you guys. Absolutely, like, find ways to do that. So travel is something that I'm really passionate about. Unfortunately, we found ourselves in the middle of a global pandemic, so it makes that really difficult. But it's key for me whenever I go away. It's almost like I encounter a different version of myself. So I love to travel, and combining traveling with writing is absolutely amazing. One of the most pivotal experiences for me was traveling to Cape Verde in Africa some years back. In fact, I wrote a short story about it. It had such a profound impact on me, like being back in Africa again, but a completely different part of Africa, and culturally it was completely new. So I was learning new things, and I was adjusting all over again. I was like an outsider all over again while being in Africa. It was a really fascinating experience. I absolutely loved that. So I think developing an adventurous spirit definitely, feeds into the work. Like, you have to have things to write about, so in order to do that, you have to live and get out there. So that's really important. Nurturing a different hobby. Yeah, this is cool as well, because we know that the writing can be all consuming. Like, it can just take up everything, and suddenly you don't have time for other things, but I think that if you can balance it with something else that you're interested in, it can be quite helpful. It can feel like, your world is much more expansive. So I would absolutely encourage people to do that. The other thing is connecting with the natural world. This is something that I really want to do more of, because it's amazing and magical, and it really feeds the spirit. and it helps you feel centered, and it makes you feel more human as well. So I think like finding ways to connect with the natural world and maybe even writing about that experience as well can be really, really helpful. The other thing is going beyond your comfort zone. So this is something I think that we often don't do enough of. Once we find our rhythm, we stay in that. You know, you might be somebody that reads certain types of books, and you know, those are the books that you like to read, and you stick to that genre. I would encourage you to step outside of that, because you can learn so much from broadening your horizons, not just with books, but in other areas of your life as well. Like step out of your comfort zones, and it can be something that's a real boost and really, really invigorating, and it feeds back into the work as well. So I think it's important to do these things. One of the things that I was really keen to do, and have been for a while, is to read more translated literature. Like there's so much amazing translated literature out there that I haven't really connected with, and it's something that I'm keen to do going forward. So like moving beyond comfort zones, I think, is really important. Finding an opposite writing buddy. This is cool, actually. So if you can find a writing buddy who's at a similar stage as you, but writing something completely different, so you're not sort of stepping on each other's toes, but you're learning from each other, and you're encouraging towards each other, and you share opportunities. It can be such a lovely thing. I remember having a writing buddy like years ago, and that was a really nice experience. It made me feel like we were on this writing adventure together. So, you know, wherever you can, like, connect with other people, other writers, to sort of help you along, because it can be really hard just doing it alone. Ultimately, you have to write it alone, but you know, it's nice to have somebody to talk about the process with. It's nice to sort of share experiences with somebody else about what writing is like, and you know, feeding back to each other can be really, really helpful. So find an opposite writing buddy. The other thing is other mediums, drawing from other mediums. This is something that I do. I love theatre, I love film. I get so much out of it. In fact, a lot of my ideas sometimes have come from going to an exhibition and seeing a particular image that has just struck me so much that I've wanted to create, you know, a world around it or a context around it. And similarly, film has been really influential for me. I remember like watching Decalogue years ago by Krzysztof Kieslowski, a Polish director, and it was a series of short films just about the human experience, and they were really powerful, and they made a real impression on me. And I wanted to write almost a short story equivalent of that, but kind of more experimental, but in a similar vein. And it was something that always stayed with me. So drawing from other mediums can really be helpful, you know, with the work. Also, if you're at a difficult point with the work as well, you know, if you've hit a roadblock with plot or something, and you give yourself a break and do something different, it can be really, really nice. So yeah, that's something I definitely recommend. Watching nature documentaries, this moves on from my point early on. This is something fun that I personally like to do. It's just really like, animals and creatures are incredible. Like, we don't know enough about them. So like watching this kind of stuff is really, really eye-opening. And for me, it gives me a lot of ideas in terms of world building, you know, like ingredients for doing that. It's just wonderful. So absolutely, it's something that I would recommend. The other thing is exciting spaces. Like, now we're in this situation with this pandemic, and it makes it really difficult because we can't, you know, a lot of the spaces that we love are shut for safety reasons, obviously, and that's the way it has to be. But looking beyond this time where things will be better, I know I love spaces. I love going to spaces that sort of feed my imagination. Often I would write in the mornings, and then, you know, after doing some work, I might, you know, go somewhere like an exhibition or just a space that feels inspiring to me. You know, places that I love in particular, like the Autocraft Gallery. That's a space in Shoreditch that curates a lot around Black people and persons of color, but also sort of cross-culturally, which I really, really love. So it's not just thinking about people of color in the UK, but in other countries. And not many galleries do that. So that's a space that means a lot to me. I would often go there a lot to kind of like refuel and be re-energized. I also love like the Welcome collection. That's an amazing, amazing place in terms of just like some of the incredible like exhibitions they have about the body and the history of the body and medical inventions, you know, throughout time. It's really, really fascinating. They also have like a great sort of bookshop and just loads of interesting things. So I often would sort of go there and really enjoy that space thoroughly. Similarly, the BFI, again, speaking about film, my God, I was living at the BFI at one point, just watching as many films as possible with my film buddy of friends. We spent many an evening there. And also sort of Greenwich Observatory as well. I'm really curious about space and the moon and life there. So that's a space that I really enjoy visiting too. So finding spaces that inspire you, I think, can be helpful, and also just giving yourself a break from your normal environment, like changing your space when you can, like writing in different spaces can really be like amazing and re-energizing. So like find ways to do that. Also just collate a list of spaces that, you know, like give you life, that you enjoy, that you know, you can visit regularly as something to kind of look forward to. It's something that's really helped me during the different stages when I was writing, and I'm sure that it's something that will help you guys too. So yeah, I think that brings me to the end. I've gone way over time. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to Comma for this space and this platform. Hopefully you've got some useful tips you know, from my talk about my journey. And yeah, I look forward to answering any extra questions.
Thank you so much, Irenosen. That was perfect. I don't know if I've come back on screen. I'm going to try and stop your screen share for a minute so we can go to questions. Oh, you've done it. Perfect.
I've done it.
Done it. Yeah, no, you've given everyone so much food for thought, and there's tons of comments talking about how inspiring you are.
Oh,
we're so grateful to have you, and thank you for making our first kind of digital version of this event as exciting as a real one. It's been really, really lovely hearing you speak.
Thank you. It's been amazing. I've loved it.
I'm glad. So we do have some questions for you.
Yeah.
Let me scroll up. So Debbie was asking, what would you say to a writer? I think this ties into what you were talking about when you were speaking about the long game and it being a really big process, but what would you say to a writer in particular who has been trying for years to find their agent and it kind of seems to them like their options are running out? What would your advice be then?
Yeah, I would say, so for me, I would definitely look at independent publishers because you don't need to have an agent to get published by an independent publisher. You know, they're often actually looking for like new voices and people doing different things. I'm just thinking of Imea McBride now as somebody that's quite inspiring in terms of that book. You know, she was working on it for years and she submitted, people kept saying no. And then 10 years later, I think Gally Beggar published it and look what happens. You know, a star was born, basically. So I would say, like, please don't give up. Like, I'm sure you've written something brilliant. It's just about finding somebody who gets it and believes in the work. So yeah, I would say definitely start looking at independent publishing houses. We have like some really good ones around. So like do your research and maybe that might be the direction you're going. And, you know, through that, you will probably get an agent. There are people who have gone that route and then got an agent off the back of that. So definitely keep that as an option. That's something that I would recommend.
Perfect. So a few people have also asked the question, do you have any journal recommendations, Irenosen, like any particular journals that you'd recommend submitting to when people are at the start of their careers?
Goodness me. Gosh, I'm trying to remember the ones that I submitted to. So I submitted to Kwani, which is especially for Black writers who are looking to do something sort of like, I guess, more subversive. Like that was a really good space to submit to, so you could try them. There are loads of online journals at the moment, so just have a look. I can't quite, like, I'm thinking of the ones that I've submitted to recently because they're the ones fresh in my mind, but there are so many around, like there are loads, yeah, and loads of new online spaces as well, so try them too, as an option, just to get your sort of foot in the door, and then maybe you can sort of try the more established ones. But yeah, some of the ones that I submitted to in the beginning were quite like sort of out there and wacky, but that kind of suited what I was doing. So yeah, there's so many. Like, go and look on, I think Spread the Word had a page where they listed like journals that you could submit to. So it might be worth investigating there to see like who you can send your stuff to.
Yeah, definitely. I think Twitter is such a good resource for finding new as well. And there's always new ones cropping up with really like specific themes. I'm thinking of like Aurora magazine in Manchester.
Yeah. There's also Wild Seed magazine for people who are like into like subversive and speculative fiction. I think they're quite new as well and quite exciting, so it might be worth like submitting to them too. But there's loads. Yeah.
So Morgan was asking, do you think that a successful career in writing depends on regionality? So many writers I love live in London, but I'm a northerner and I feel so at home here and worried that this will hinder me.
Goodness me. Well, it is a real thing that there's just more in London, you know, we can't deny that. That's true. But I don't think that necessarily has to stop your success, because of course there are writers in other regions that have done well and had books published. So I think try not to think that way. You know, I know it can be really hard and feel like the industry is slightly inaccessible when you're not based in London, but it's about finding the right champions. And once you have the right champions, you know, like the sky is the limit. They will push your work and push your voice out there. So you don't really, I think, need to stress too much about that. It's about making sure you get the right agent who really believes in your voice. That agent's going to find the best publisher for you. And, you know, that publisher is going to hopefully give it all they can in terms of marketing you, you know, even if they don't have the big budgets, they can be really creative about how they market you and submitting you for prizes as well. You know, that's a really good way of getting traction for books too. So it's about having those right advocates, and then hopefully they can push you forward, and, you know, you don't have to stress about like regionality being an issue. I know it is, but I think personally, like if you worry about that, then it becomes a big thing, and then you become weighed down by it. You don't want to do that. You know, there are people, you know, in parts of the UK where they just feel like they have no access. But, you know, they will make the trip up if they can, or if there's an industry day happening in their region, you know, they will go, you know, and increasingly, like, we're seeing more online stuff happening, like online events and, you know, online meet the agents or meet the editors. So you don't have to feel like you don't have that access anymore in the same way.
Absolutely. And it's worth noting that some of the big publishing houses are starting to move to Manchester. Specifically, and also we have the Northern Fiction Alliance up here, which is Book Comma is part of that, and it's a group of northern publishers up in the north that are kind of gunning for the representation from the north. So it is happening, it is there. So Heather asked, how much did your books change from first draft to final draft when you were them?
A lot. As I hinted in my talk, oh my God. So I think it was like maybe 3 years ago, I found the first draft of like my novel, and I was like, wow, this was bad. You know, this was not great, but I was so confident, you know, and that's what I like, is that I just had the confidence to keep going. And because I had that confidence, it got better and better with each draft. So yeah, you know, I talked about being frustrated at the time. I knew at the time that it wasn't where I wanted it to be. But I just had this vision and I was really passionate about it. So I just kept on working at it and kept connecting to people who, I guess, saw something in my work, you know, said, oh, you know, it's not quite there yet, but that you do have a voice. So it's about doing that and then just keep that practice going. And what happens is, you know, the quality will kind of meet your expectation, because in the beginning you have the expectation and maybe the quality doesn't quite meet it, but if you keep going, eventually that happens. So yeah, drastically different, particularly with the novel.
Brilliant. Well, I think that is the end of the questions, and I think we're out of time. So thank you so much, Irenosen. That was brilliant, and it's worth reminding everybody that this will stay on our YouTube channel, so that you can go back through Irenosen's slides and listen to her again if you need to. And yeah, we've got a series of free panel events all week, 11 a.m. every morning this week. And it's going to be on subjects on how the publisher works with you as a writer, how you can build your own brand online as a writer, where you can get your inspirations from and how you use them. And there's also a panel with literary agents, so you can hear from them as well and hear their perspective on how things work. So yeah, thank you so much once again, Irenosen. It's been lovely.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a joy, and what a privilege to kick off your first sort of digital keynote speech. I'm really chuffed, and thank you to everybody for joining us as well. And yeah, do definitely sign up for the other like free events. I think it's amazing that Comma and you know, Manchester Writing School are doing this. It's like a wonderful thing. So thank you to you guys for trying to make things more accessible as well. It's really important.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I think we all need some inspiration right now, and everyone is thanking you in the comments. So many thank yous.
My pleasure. Thank you guys.
Bye guys, have a great night. I'm gonna
have a lovely evening.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.